The brass key was still pressed into my palm when my husband pushed the divorce papers across our kitchen island. Daniel had given me that key 13 years earlier on the porch of his family's mountain cabin outside Estes Park. Back then, he had closed my fingers around it and told me there would never be a door in his life I couldn't open. That morning, his mother sat beside him in my chair. Eleanor Brooks wore a cream cashmere coat and pearl earrings, as if she had come to approve a business acquisition instead of watch her son end his marriage. A cup of coffee steamed in front of her. She had used the china cup I saved for holidays. "You're 44, Claire," she said. "At some point, hope becomes denial." I looked at Daniel. He was still wearing the charcoal suit he had worn to the office the day before. His tie was gone, the top button of his shirt open. He looked exhausted, but not surprised. This was not a conversation that had gotten out of control. It had been rehearsed. "What is this?" I asked, though the words on the first page were large enough to read from where I stood. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Daniel placed one hand flat against the marble countertop. "Please sit down." "I'd rather stand." Eleanor released a quiet breath through her nose. She had always treated my refusal to obey as evidence of emotional instability. Daniel glanced at her, then back at me. "I filed yesterday." Outside the windows, wet snow dragged itself across the foothills. A magpie landed on the back fence, shook the water from its wings, and flew off again. The coffee maker clicked as the warming plate shut down. Every ordinary sound in the house seemed louder than my husband's voice. I looked at the envelope, then at the fertility clinic folder tucked beneath my arm. Daniel had promised to attend our appointment at 9. After 3 miscarriages and nearly 2 years of testing, today was supposed to be the day we finally stopped guessing. My specialist had asked Daniel to complete a basic fertility evaluation months earlier. He had postponed it every time: a trial, a client emergency, a conference in Dallas, an early meeting he could not move. But he had found time to meet with a divorce attorney. "You filed before the workup?" I asked. Daniel's jaw tightened. "We already know what the problem is." I stared at him. "No, we know my ovarian reserve is lower than average. That is not the same thing." Eleanor lifted her cup with both hands. "You've lost 3 pregnancies." The sentence was spoken without cruelty in her voice. That made it crueler. She said it like an accountant reading 3 failed quarters from a report. My fingers tightened around the cabin key. "I remember." "Then you understand why Daniel has to think about his future." "I am his future." Eleanor gave me a look almost gentle enough to pass for pity. "You were." Daniel closed his eyes. "Mom." It was the kind of protest he had used throughout our marriage. Quiet, tired, carefully designed to sound like resistance without requiring his mother to stop. Eleanor set down her cup. "My son wants children. He wants a family that carries his name forward. You cannot ask him to sacrifice that, because you're afraid to accept reality." I waited for Daniel to correct her. He did not. Something inside me became very still. Not broken, still. I placed the clinic folder on top of the divorce papers. "Did you tell her about today's appointment?" Daniel looked toward the windows. "Claire, did you tell her you have never been tested?" Eleanor's expression sharpened. "Daniel is perfectly healthy." "You don't know that. He comes from a strong family. That is not a medical diagnosis. My son does not need to humiliate himself to prove what is already obvious." There it was, not concern, not medicine, pride wearing the costume of certainty. I turned back to Daniel. "Is that what you believe?" He rubbed his thumb against the edge of the countertop, a small nervous habit I had seen before jury verdicts and negotiations. "I'm 47, he said. "I can't keep waiting." The words landed with more force than the divorce petition. For 13 years, I had stood beside him through 80-hour work weeks, his father's death, 2 failed partnerships, and the panic attacks he never admitted having. I had slept on hospital chairs after our miscarriages, while he paced hallways and promised we would survive whatever came next. Now he spoke as though our marriage had been a delayed departure, as though I had kept him from his real life. "You said we were a family," I whispered. His face changed for half a second. Guilt. Then Eleanor reached over and placed her hand on his wrist. Daniel let her. That answered everything. I removed my wedding ring slowly. Eleanor watched the movement with open relief. Daniel looked as if he might speak, but he had already used every word that mattered. I placed the ring on the papers, then I set the brass cabin key beside it. Daniel stared at the key. "You should keep that." "No." Claire, the cabin was ours. I picked up my clinic folder. So was this house. I walked toward the mudroom before either of them could answer. Behind me, Eleanor said my name with the firm patience of a woman accustomed to stopping people at the door. I did not turn around. My hand was already on the knob when Daniel finally spoke. I never wanted to hurt you. I looked back at the man I had loved for 13 years. He sat beneath the pendant light we had chosen together, beside the mother who had spent 2 years, quietly converting my grief into evidence against me. You didn't have to want it, I said. You only had to let it happen. Then I left for the fertility appointment alone. 4 hours later, a nurse called and asked me to come back before the clinic closed. There was something in my blood work my doctor wanted to discuss in person. By sunset, the divorce papers were still lying on Daniel's kitchen island. My wedding ring was beside them. So was the key to the cabin where he had once promised every door would remain open to me. But inside my coat pocket, my hand rested over a grainy black and white image no larger than a receipt. And for the first time that day, Daniel Brooks was no longer the person holding the most important truth. For 13 years, Daniel Brooks and I built the kind of marriage other people admired. We lived just outside Golden, Colorado, where the foothills glowed purple at sunset, and winter storms rolled in without warning. Daniel left before sunrise each morning for his corporate law firm in downtown Denver. I spent my days at Front Range Wildlife Recovery, the nonprofit rehabilitation center I directed, caring for injured hawks, orphaned foxes, and frightened animals that fought the very people trying to save them. From the outside, we looked perfectly balanced. He negotiated billion-dollar contracts. I rescued broken wildlife. Daniel used to say that was exactly why we worked. We met because of an injured red-tailed hawk tangled in construction fencing near his office. Instead of calling someone else, he drove the bird to our center himself. I think it wants to kill me, he admitted, as the hawk slammed against the cardboard box. I laughed, and he laughed too. A week later, he asked me to dinner. Halfway through the meal, he noticed dried formula on my sleeve from feeding orphaned fox kits. Instead of teasing me, he reached across the table with a damp napkin. You missed a spot. That simple gesture told me more about his character than any grand romantic speech ever could. We married 18 months later. Our life settled into familiar routines. Saturday breakfasts, weekend drives through the Rockies, playful arguments about whether wolves were smarter than eagles. Daniel insisted every debate had a correct answer. I reminded him marriage wasn't a courtroom. He always smiled before saying, "That's exactly what someone losing the argument would say." Then he'd kiss me. When we finally decided to start a family, we dreamed without hesitation. Daniel pictured teaching a little boy to ski. I imagined a daughter bringing every injured bird she found home for treatment. The first pregnancy came quickly. To surprise him, I bought the tiniest pair of hiking boots I could find and tucked them inside one of his dress shoes. Minutes later, I heard him call my name. When I walked upstairs, he stood frozen beside the bed, holding the tiny boot with tears already filling his eyes. For weeks, he couldn't stop talking about our baby. He researched hospitals, compared car seats, and announced every Sunday how big the baby had grown. Then, at 9 weeks, the ultrasound room fell silent. There isn't a heartbeat. Neither of us recovered from that day as quickly as we pretended. 18 months later, we lost another pregnancy. The third lasted long enough for Daniel to paint the nursery and order a crib before we lost that baby too. The unopened crib disappeared into the basement. The nursery door stayed closed. Something inside our marriage closed with it. Daniel buried himself in work. Longer hours, more business trips, dinner conversations replaced by emails. Around the same time, Eleanor Brooks began visiting more often. She never blamed me directly. Instead, she wrapped judgment inside polite questions. Have you tried another specialist? Or, I've heard stress can make pregnancy difficult. Each comment sounded helpful, but each one ended in the same conclusion. My body had failed her son. Daniel rarely defended me. He usually changed the subject. At first, I called it keeping the peace. Eventually, I realized keeping peace with his mother meant sacrificing it with me. One evening, after Eleanor suggested we'd simply run out of time, I confronted Daniel. Why do you let her talk to me like that? He loosened his tie without meeting my eyes. You know how Mom is. She doesn't worry about me, Daniel. She judges me. He sighed. I don't want another fight. That became his answer to everything. Not agreement, not support, just silence. Nearly 2 years after our third miscarriage, Dr. Maya Patel gave us the first real medical explanation. "You have diminished ovarian reserve," she said carefully. "It may make pregnancy harder, but it does not make pregnancy impossible." Then she turned to Daniel. "I'd also like to complete a routine fertility evaluation for you." He agreed immediately. The testing kit arrived the next week, but it stayed unopened in our bathroom drawer. Whenever I reminded him, another excuse appeared. A trial, a client emergency, a conference, an early meeting. At first I thought he was embarrassed. Later I realized he was afraid. As long as he never took the test, he never had to risk learning the problem might not be mine alone. Meanwhile, Eleanor became more certain. She stopped saying pregnancy would be difficult. She started saying it would never happen. Daniel never corrected her. The night before he served me divorce papers, I found the fertility kit still sealed beneath a stack of towels. I carried it downstairs. "You promised, Dr. Patel." "I know." "Then take the test." He barely looked up from his laptop. "Not tonight." "It takes less than an hour." For the first time in 13 years, I saw something in his eyes that frightened me more than grief. Not hesitation, decision. "I know this matters," he said quietly. The next morning, his mother was sitting in my chair. The divorce papers were waiting on our kitchen island. Before Daniel spoke a single word, I understood the truth. While I had spent months fighting for our future, he had already chosen one without me. Daniel filed for divorce on a Monday. By Friday afternoon, I was living alone in a furnished apartment in Lakewood. The furniture looked as though someone had rented a life instead of living one. The walls were beige, the curtains were beige, and even the carpet seemed determined not to offend anyone. The only things that belonged to me were stacked inside cardboard boxes. One held my clothes, one held books, and the smallest sat beside my bed. Inside were 3 ultrasound photographs, the tiny hiking boots Daniel had cried over, and the brass cabin key I hadn't realized I'd slipped into my purse before leaving the house. I held the key for several minutes that first night. Then I closed the box. Some memories were easier to carry than to look at. Sleep became impossible. Every unfamiliar sound reminded me I no longer belonged anywhere. The refrigerator hummed. Someone upstairs paced the floor after midnight, and rain tapped against the windows. I kept reaching toward the empty side of the bed before remembering no one was there. Monday morning came anyway. Animals don't postpone emergencies because someone's heart is broken. By 8 o'clock, I was back at Front Range Wildlife Recovery. The emergency phone rang before I'd even taken off my coat. "Vehicle strike," one of our volunteers said. "Juvenile bald eagle." The bird arrived barely conscious. Its left wing was fractured, and one eye was swollen shut. As the veterinary team worked, the eagle fought every hand that tried to save it. One volunteer stepped back. "It doesn't trust us." "It shouldn't," I answered quietly. "It's frightened." The words surprised me because I wasn't talking about the eagle anymore. Later that afternoon, I escaped outside while the staff finished surgery. A volunteer I hadn't met before was repairing one of the perimeter fences. He looked well into his 70s. His gray flannel shirt was rolled to his elbows, and every movement carried the confidence of someone who had spent most of his life outdoors. "You're Claire," he said without looking up. "I am. I'm Harold Jensen." He extended a rough hand. "I started volunteering last week. I've heard good things." He smiled. "People only say that because I fix things they don't want to." I laughed softly. He glanced toward me. "That's better." "What is?" Laughing. I hadn't realized how long it had been. Harold returned to tightening a bolt. After several minutes, he spoke again. "You know what I've learned about broken fences?" I waited. "Most people repair the part that's visible." He tapped one of the wooden posts. "But the damage usually starts underneath." I looked across the rehabilitation grounds. "I'm not sure I understand." "You will." He didn't explain further. Somehow, that made the sentence stay with me. The divorce moved faster than I expected. Daniel's attorney communicated through Olivia Grant, the family lawyer I'd hired 3 days after leaving the house. Olivia wasted very little time on sympathy. She preferred facts. "Has he moved any assets?" "I don't know. We'll find out." "Has he asked you to sign anything?" "No." "Good." She closed the folder. "Don't make permanent decisions while you're grieving." "I won't." She nodded. "I believe you." Then she leaned forward. "But remember something anyway." "What?" "Grief has a way of making decent people negotiate against themselves." That sentence followed me home. Daniel never called, not once. Every message came through lawyers, every conversation became paperwork. 13 years together had somehow been translated into file numbers and legal deadlines. One evening, I stopped at a grocery store after work. Without thinking, I reached for Daniel's favorite coffee. My hand stopped halfway to the shelf. For several seconds, I simply stared at the bag. Then I put it back. Love doesn't disappear overnight. Habit lasts much longer. 2 days later, my phone reminded me about the fertility appointment Daniel had promised to attend before everything fell apart. I almost canceled. Then I remembered Dr. Patel's words. It does not mean impossible. I drove to the clinic alone. The waiting room hadn't changed. Soft piano music, watercolor paintings, couples sitting shoulder to shoulder. Only this time, I was the only patient without someone beside me. Dr. Maya Patel welcomed me into her office. I wasn't sure you'd come. I wasn't sure either. She smiled gently. I'm glad you did. She reviewed my chart, then asked a series of routine questions. Finally, she paused. When was your last cycle? I answered. She frowned slightly. Any unusual symptoms? I've been exhausted. Anything else? A little nausea. She nodded. It could be nothing. She typed a few notes. But I'd like to repeat one blood test before we discuss next steps. I assumed she meant another hormone panel. After nearly 4 years of fertility appointments, blood draws had become ordinary. 5 minutes later, I was walking back to my car. I didn't think about the test again. That evening, I heated canned soup and opened my laptop. I tried reading the same email 3 times without understanding a single sentence. At 4:37 p.m., my phone rang. Dr. Maya Patel. Something tightened inside my chest. I answered immediately. Claire? Yes. Are you somewhere private? I'm at home. She took a careful breath. I've received your results. I waited. Your pregnancy test is positive. The apartment disappeared, the refrigerator, the traffic outside, the rain against the windows. Everything faded beneath those 4 impossible words. You're pregnant. I pressed my hand against the kitchen table to steady myself. Are you certain? The blood test is definitive. My eyes filled before I realized I was crying, not because I trusted the future. After 3 miscarriages, hope still frightened me. I cried because everyone, including me, had started believing my body had already made its final decision. It hadn't. Based on your dates, Dr. Patel continued, you're approximately 4 weeks pregnant. 4 weeks before the divorce petition, before Daniel ended our marriage, before Eleanor declared that I would never give her son a family. When the call ended, I opened my contacts. Daniel's name appeared at the top. One phone call would change everything. I rested my thumb above his number, then another memory surfaced. Daniel sitting silently while his mother decided my worth. Slowly, I locked the screen. For years, I had carried every burden immediately, every fear immediately, every piece of hope immediately. This time, the truth belonged to me, at least for one more night. I barely slept. Not because I was excited, but because I had learned that hope could disappear overnight. 3 pregnancies had taught me not to celebrate too soon. By 7 the next morning, I was back at Dr. Maya Patel's office. She greeted me with the same calm expression she always wore, but I noticed her studying my face before speaking. How are you feeling? I gave the only honest answer I had. I don't know yet. She smiled gently. That's understandable. After another blood test and an ultrasound, she folded her hands. So far, everything looks encouraging. Those 3 words mattered more than I wanted to admit. So far. No promises, no guarantees, just enough hope to take one more step. Because of my age and history, every appointment would be treated as high risk. More scans, more blood work, more waiting. Before I left, Dr. Patel glanced at my chart again. Did Daniel ever complete the fertility evaluation I requested? I looked away. No. He never came in? No. She sighed quietly. Claire, fertility has never been only a woman's responsibility. I know. I wanted both of you evaluated because couples deserve facts, not assumptions. Facts. That word stayed with me all morning. For months, everyone had been speaking in assumptions. Eleanor assumed, Daniel assumed, and eventually even I had started assuming. Maybe my body really had failed us. Maybe everyone else had simply accepted the truth before I could. Now my own pregnancy was proving how dangerous assumptions could be. Back at the apartment, I opened my laptop. I started writing an email. Daniel, there's something you need to know. I stopped, deleted it, and started again. I saw Dr. Patel today. I deleted that too. Nothing felt right. Every sentence sounded as though I was asking the man who had already rejected me to come back and rescue me. I wasn't. I simply wanted him to know he was going to be a father. Before I could write another word, my phone rang. It was Olivia. I've received another request from Daniel's attorney. What now? They'd like to finalize the property settlement quickly. I laughed once, not because anything was funny. He's in a hurry, so it seems. There was a short silence. Then Olivia asked softly, "How are you doing?" I looked toward the ultrasound picture resting on my kitchen table. "I'm pregnant." She didn't speak for several seconds. Finally, she asked, "Does Daniel know?" "No." "When are you planning to tell him?" "I don't know." She considered that carefully. "You don't have to decide today." "I feel like I do." "No," her voice remained calm. "You've spent years making decisions together," she paused. "You're allowed to make one for yourself." For the first time since the divorce papers appeared on my kitchen island, someone had given me permission to slow down. That afternoon, Eleanor sent me a text message. "Dragging this divorce out won't change reality. Daniel deserves the chance to build the family you've never been able to give him." I read it twice, then I took a screenshot. Without replying, I forwarded it to Olivia. 5 minutes later, my phone rang again. "Don't answer her," Olivia said. "I wasn't going to." "Good," she hesitated. "Keep every message." "Why?" "Because words reveal patterns." I understood exactly what she meant. Eleanor wasn't grieving my marriage. She was building a case against me. The following week settled into a strange rhythm. Morning sickness arrived without caring that my marriage had ended. Laundry still needed folding, bills still needed paying, and the wildlife center still received injured animals every single day. Life never paused long enough for heartbreak to catch its breath. Harold became part of that new routine. Some mornings he repaired enclosures. Other afternoons he helped volunteers rebuild damaged nesting platforms. He rarely asked personal questions. Instead, he simply talked while we worked. One afternoon he noticed the crackers sticking out of my jacket pocket. "Those your lunch?" "They're keeping my stomach settled." He looked at me for a moment. "My wife carried crackers everywhere." I smiled. "You guessed." "I noticed." He pointed toward my water bottle. "You've refilled it 4 times. I laughed. "You pay attention." "I spent 40 years tracking wildlife." He shrugged. "People aren't much different." We walked toward the eagle enclosure together. After a few minutes, he spoke again. "When my wife died, everyone kept telling me life would go back to normal. Did it?" "No," he smiled sadly. "It became something new." I looked at him. Was that enough? Eventually, he rested both hands on the fence. "The goal isn't getting your old life back. It's learning not to fear the next one." That sentence stayed with me. Weeks later, during another appointment, Dr. Patel switched on the Doppler monitor. The room filled with static, then a heartbeat. Fast, steady, strong. I covered my mouth with both hands. After 3 pregnancies that ended in silence, this sound felt almost impossible. Dr. Patel smiled. "I've been waiting to hear that." Tears blurred my vision. "So have I." She printed another ultrasound image before handing it to me. "I think it's time to let yourself believe this baby is here." For the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine a future again. That afternoon, I called Olivia. "I think I'm ready." "To tell Daniel?" "Yes." "How do you want to do it?" No drama, no accusations, just the truth. Exactly 1 hour later, Daniel Brooks received formal legal notice that the child I was carrying had been conceived before he filed for divorce. Less than 20 minutes later, my phone began vibrating. Daniel. I watched his name disappear. Then it appeared again and again. 5 missed calls, 3 voicemail messages, 2 text messages. "Claire, please answer. We need to talk." I placed the phone face down on the table. For 13 years, I had always been the one waiting for Daniel to make time for me. Now, for the first time, he was the one waiting. And I had finally learned that not every answer had to be given the moment someone demanded it. "I'll cry thee." Daniel didn't stop calling. The first day he called 7 times, the second day 4. By the end of the week, the phone had gone quiet, replaced by short messages that sounded nothing like the man who had once negotiated billion-dollar mergers without showing emotion. "Please call me. I need to understand. Claire, please?" I read every message, but I answered none of them. Not because I wanted him to suffer, but because every important conversation in our marriage had happened on his schedule. This one would happen on mine. Olivia arranged a meeting for the following Tuesday. My office, she said. Neutral ground. I don't know if I'm ready. You don't have to forgive him. She closed the file in front of her. You only have to hear the truth. Daniel was already waiting when I arrived. He stood the moment I entered the conference room. For the first time since I had met him, he looked uncertain. His suit was pressed and his tie perfectly straight, but his eyes were tired. There were shadows beneath them that expensive tailoring couldn't hide. Claire. I nodded. Neither of us reached across the table. Olivia waited until we were seated. You've both received Dr. Patel's documentation confirming the pregnancy. Daniel looked directly at me. Is it true? Yes. You were already pregnant. Yes. He lowered his eyes. Then, after several seconds, he spoke again. I finally completed the fertility evaluation. The room became very still. My specialist called last week. His voice cracked for the first time. I have severe male factor infertility. No one interrupted him. I asked whether natural conception was impossible. He gave a hollow laugh. He told me medicine almost never uses the word impossible. Another silence followed. He said it would have been extremely unlikely. I studied the man across from me. For months he had accepted one explanation without asking a single difficult question. Now he finally knew what that decision had cost. I spent my career asking for evidence, he said quietly. When it came to my own life, he looked away. I never asked for any. I took a slow breath. You didn't. You were carrying all the blame. I was. And I let you. Yes. There was no argument, no excuse. Only the weight of words that had arrived far too late. Olivia opened another folder. There's something else you should understand. She placed several medical records on the table. Mrs. Sullivan was never diagnosed with infertility. Daniel frowned. I've read Dr. Patel's report. Olivia nodded. Then you know diminished ovarian reserve is not the same diagnosis. I know that now. She was never told she couldn't become pregnant. Daniel closed his eyes. My mother said otherwise. Neither Olivia nor I answered. He looked at us again. She told me someone from the clinic confirmed Claire would never have children. Olivia's expression hardened. No one from that clinic could legally discuss Claire's records. I know. Dr. Patel confirmed that herself. A long silence settled over the room. Daniel spoke almost to himself. Then Mom lied. Not misunderstood. Not guessed. Lied. The meeting ended without raised voices, without accusations. There was nothing left to argue about. Facts don't negotiate. That evening, Daniel drove to his mother's house. Eleanor welcomed him exactly as she always had. She offered coffee, asked about work, and mentioned a charity fundraiser scheduled for the following month. Daniel interrupted before she finished. Who did you speak to at Dr. Patel's office? She looked surprised. I told you. No. He remained standing. You told me someone confirmed Claire couldn't have children. Yes. Who? She stirred her coffee. I don't remember. What did they actually say? They explained her condition. What words did they use? For the first time, Eleanor hesitated. They mentioned diminished ovarian reserve. That's all? It meant the same thing. No, Daniel's voice stayed calm. It didn't. She set down her cup. I wasn't going to watch you waste your life waiting for grandchildren. You didn't know that. I knew enough. You assumed. I used common sense. You decided. Her expression hardened. I was protecting you. Daniel shook his head slowly. No, you were protecting the future you wanted. She opened her mouth to respond, but he didn't let her. I never completed the fertility test. I know. You knew. Silence. You knew I had never been evaluated. Again, silence. And you still convinced me Claire was the problem. For the first time in his life, Daniel watched certainty disappear from his mother's face. I only wanted what was best. You wanted control. His words landed gently, which somehow made them hurt more. I believed you because believing you was easier than facing my own fear. Eleanor stared at him. I was afraid the problem might be me. The admission hung between them, years too late. I chose the explanation that protected my pride. He looked around the house where he had grown up. Every photograph, every piece of furniture, every family memory. Suddenly, none of it felt familiar. I ended my marriage without demanding the truth. His mother whispered his name. He walked toward the front door. Daniel. He stopped for only a second. Mom. He looked back one last time. If you had lied and I had refused to believe you, Claire and I might still have had a chance. His voice remained painfully calm. But the marriage didn't end because you lied. He opened the door. It ended because I wanted your lie to be true. Then he walked away. Back at my apartment, my phone buzzed one final time before midnight. It wasn't another missed call. It was a single text message. I know the truth now. I'm sorry I learned it after I destroyed everything. I read the message once, then I placed my phone on the nightstand and switched off the light. Some apologies arrive too late to repair what's broken, but they still matter. Because sometimes the first person who needs to hear the truth is the one who spent years running from it. By early September, I was 38 weeks pregnant. Every appointment with Dr. Maya Patel ended the same way. So far, so good. I had learned to love those 4 words. They carried hope without pretending life came with guarantees. The nursery occupied one corner of my apartment's second bedroom. Nothing matched. The crib had been donated by a young couple whose twins had outgrown it. The rocking chair came from one of our volunteers, and a handmade quilt arrived anonymously after someone at the wildlife center learned I was expecting. Every item represented kindness, not obligation, not pity, just kindness. One Friday afternoon, Harold walked into my office carrying a small wooden box. I finished it. Inside rested a hand-carved eagle. Its wings weren't perfectly even. One edge still carried the faint mark of a repaired crack. "It isn't perfect," he said. "It's beautiful." He smiled. "No." He placed it gently in my hands. "It's honest." I looked up. When my wife died, I tried carving flawless pieces. He touched the tiny eagle. Then I realized the strongest things aren't the ones that never break. He smiled softly. They're the ones repaired with care. The carving stayed beside the baby's crib. 3 days later, labor began. The first contraction hit while I was leaving the grocery store. I ignored it. The second came before I reached my car. By the third, I was timing them. Dr. Patel's office told me not to wait. I drove to St. Andrew Medical Center. By the time I reached labor and delivery, speaking through contractions required real effort. A nurse helped me into a wheelchair despite my protests. Minutes later, I heard a familiar voice. "Claire?" I looked toward the hallway. Daniel stood outside the nurse's station holding a stack of legal files. He looked as shocked as I felt. "What are you doing here?" "I was meeting with the hospital board." Another contraction answered before I could. He instinctively stepped toward me, then stopped. The nurse glanced between us. "Is he family?" Daniel answered quietly. "I'm the father." No one spoke after that. The charge nurse guided him toward the waiting room. "We'll keep you updated." He nodded immediately. "Thank you." No demands, no arguments, just quiet acceptance. Several hours later, Dr. Patel arrived. She examined me before smiling. "I think today's the day." Labor erased every other thought. The room became smaller, time disappeared, and there was only breathing, waiting, and one final push. Then a cry, strong, loud, alive. Everything inside me broke open. The nurse laid my son against my chest. His tiny fingers curled around one of mine. "Hello," I whispered through tears. "I've been waiting for you." Nothing else existed. Not the divorce, not the lawyers, not Eleanor. Only this tiny life breathing against my heart. Outside the room, Dr. Patel found Daniel still waiting. "Your son is healthy." He closed his eyes. "And Claire?" "She's doing well." He nodded. "May I see them?" "I'll ask." When Dr. Patel entered my room, she didn't pressure me. Daniel would like to meet his son. I looked down at the sleeping baby. After a long silence, I answered, 5 minutes. Daniel stepped inside slowly. He stopped several feet away. "I don't deserve this." "No," my voice was calm. "You don't." He accepted the truth without defending himself. When I finally placed our son into his arms, his entire posture changed. The confident attorney disappeared. He held the baby as though the smallest mistake might break the world. A tear slipped down his face. "I've argued cases in front of judges." His voice trembled. "I've never been this scared." Our son yawned, then settled peacefully against Daniel's chest. For a brief moment, the room became perfectly quiet. "He has your eyes," Daniel whispered. "And your stubborn chin," I answered. For the first time in over a year, we smiled at the same moment. Not because our marriage had been saved, but because our son had arrived safely. Eventually, Daniel looked at me. There should be a DNA test. It wasn't an accusation, it was acceptance. The trust between us is gone. I nodded. And facts matter. They always did. 12 days later, the results arrived. Probability of paternity, greater than 99.9%. Neither of us looked surprised. Truth rarely needs applause. It simply stands where it always belonged. That afternoon, Daniel asked whether he could visit. I agreed under 3 conditions. Olivia would be present, the visit would last 1 hour, and Eleanor would not be there. Daniel accepted every condition immediately. He arrived carrying only a children's picture book about migrating birds. No toys? I asked. He smiled faintly. I figured he'll outgrow toys. He looked down at the book. But maybe he'll remember stories. I accepted it, not for Daniel, but for our son. When the visit ended, Daniel stood beside the doorway. He looked at the baby one last time before meeting my eyes. I can't become the husband I should have been. His voice remained steady despite the tears gathering there. But if you'll allow it, he took a slow breath. I want to become the father he deserves. For the first time since our marriage collapsed, I believed him. Not because he had found the right words, but because he had finally stopped trying to protect himself from the truth. At Thopper on the or on printer, people think the hardest part of a divorce is signing the papers. It isn't. The hardest part comes afterward. It's learning how to build a peaceful life from pieces that no longer fit together. The first few months after our son's birth settled into an ordinary rhythm. He woke before sunrise, he cried whenever his bottle was a minute late. He laughed at ceiling fans, and he hated wearing socks. The extraordinary circumstances that had surrounded his arrival slowly disappeared beneath the wonderfully ordinary work of raising a child. Daniel never missed a visit. If he promised to arrive at 6, he arrived at 6. If traffic delayed him by 5 minutes, he called before I noticed. He never asked to stay longer than we had agreed. He never searched my apartment for signs that I had moved on. And he never tried to convince me to reconsider the divorce. Every conversation centered on our son, nothing else. One afternoon, after Daniel left, Olivia watched his car disappear down the street. He's different. I know. Do you trust him? I thought carefully before answering. I trust the father he's choosing to become. And the husband? I smiled sadly. That man belongs to the past. The custody agreement was finalized the following spring. There were no dramatic courtroom speeches, no shouting, no attempts to punish each other. Just 2 attorneys, a retired judge, and 2 parents trying to make the best decision for a little boy who had done nothing wrong. We agreed on shared medical decisions, shared educational decisions, birthdays together if our son wanted them, and respect at every exchange. The judge looked at both of us before signing the final order. Children don't need perfect parents, he smiled gently. They need parents who choose them over old arguments. Neither of us forgot those words. Eleanor remained absent for months. Daniel never asked me to change that. One afternoon he called. My mother wants to apologize. I stayed quiet. You don't owe her a meeting. I know. I told her that. Several days passed before I answered. Finally, I agreed. Not because she deserved forgiveness, but because I wanted to hear whether she finally understood what she had done. We met in Olivia's office. Eleanor looked older than I remembered. Not physically, but emotionally. She stared at her grandson sleeping peacefully inside his stroller before speaking. I've rehearsed this conversation 100 times, she managed a tired smile. Every version sounded like I was defending myself. She folded her hands. So I'm not going to. For several moments, no one spoke. Then she looked directly at me. I was wrong. 4 simple words, nothing more. When Daniel's father died, I convinced myself that protecting my family meant controlling it. Her voice trembled. I measured your value by whether you could give my son grandchildren. She closed her eyes briefly. I forgot that you were already my family. Tears rolled quietly down her face. I replaced uncertainty with certainty because certainty made me feel safe. She looked toward the floor. I lied. No excuses, no blame, only truth. I took a slow breath. I accept your apology. Hope appeared in her eyes. Then I continued. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. She nodded immediately. I know. You may know your grandson. Fresh tears gathered, but never without clear boundaries. I understand. You never speak badly about me. I won't. You never ask him to choose between us. I never will, she lowered her head. I've already lost enough. I believed her, not because I trusted her completely, but because regret had finally replaced pride. Time moved forward. Our son learned to walk, then to run, then to ask endless questions about every bird he saw in the sky. Daniel rarely missed a soccer game. He attended every parent conference. When our son caught the flu, Daniel slept overnight in the hospital chair beside me without either of us mentioning the past. We weren't rebuilding a marriage. We were building trust. Slowly, carefully, one promise at a time. Harold retired from the wildlife center that summer. During his farewell gathering, he handed me one last carving. A young eagle standing beside an older one. They're not flying, I noticed. He smiled. They don't have to. What do you mean? The older one isn't teaching the younger one how to be perfect. He placed the carving in my hands. It's teaching him he'll never have to fly alone. I understood immediately. Some lessons aren't spoken. They're lived. Nearly 2 years after Daniel placed divorce papers on our kitchen island, I found the brass cabin key inside the same wooden box where I had kept it since leaving our home. I turned it over in my hand. The metal had grown dull, and time had worn away its shine, just like grief. I smiled to myself, not because the memories no longer hurt, but because they no longer controlled me. The following weekend, Daniel picked up our son for the afternoon. Before they left, I handed him a small envelope. He looked confused. What's this? Open it later? After he drove away, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and watched the Colorado mountains disappear beneath the evening light. About an hour later, my phone buzzed with one message. I understand. Thank you. Inside the envelope had been the brass cabin key. No letter, no explanation. It no longer belonged to me, and neither did the life attached to it. Some promises end, and some doors close forever. That doesn't mean life ends behind them. It simply means another path has already opened. Looking back now, people sometimes ask whether I regret not fighting harder for my marriage. I always give the same answer, no. Because a marriage cannot be saved by one person willing to fight. It takes two people willing to face the truth. Daniel eventually became the father he promised he would be. Not overnight, but year after year, choice after choice. And I became something I never imagined I could become. Not a woman who survived betrayal, but a woman who no longer measured her future by it. If there's one thing this journey taught me, it's this. Never let someone else's fear become the definition of your worth. People will misunderstand you, judge you, and even abandon you. But none of those things have the power to decide who you are. Only you do. And sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't making the people who hurt you regret losing you. It's building a life so full of peace that you no longer need them to.